Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, marching onwards towards the end of Mishnah Berurah. We're getting there, getting pretty close. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Megillah, and we pick up today on Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. In today's share, we will be learning Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, but we pick up on Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph in Siman Taf Reish Pei Tes, which we began yesterday, and we are up to Sif Beis. Today's learning should serve as a schus le'ili nishmas Rachel bas Reb Menachem Aleha Hashalom. Okay, so we said yesterday in Taf Reish Pei Tes Sif Aleph, Hakol chayavim b'kriyasa. Everyone is chayiv in hearing the Megillah, reading the Megillah. Anoshim, noshim, gerim, avadim, shechrarim. And we also learned mechanchem es aktanim lekroisa. We have to train the children in the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Now we go on to Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Echad hakoirei, whether one reads the Megillah himself, ve'echad hashemeya min hakoirei, or one who simply hears the Megillah from somebody who's reading the Megillah, Yotza Yedei Chayvasai, they are both Yotza, the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. You don't have to read the Megillah yourself in order to be Yotza the mitzvah. You could hear it from somebody else. And of course, this is based on the halachic concept of Shemeya Ka'oina. When somebody listens, when somebody hears something, and he has kavanah to be Yotze, Shemeya, hearing ka'oina, is like saying it himself. However, continues the Mechaber, there's a very important caveat here. For who, when does this apply? Sheyishma mipi mishu chayiv b'kriyasa. In order for you to be yotza, the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, by hearing the Megillah from somebody else, the one who's actually reading the Megillah has to be somebody who he himself is chayiv in Megillah. If he is chayiv in Megillah, then his laning is a kriya shal mitzvah, and if he has kavanah to be motzi you, and you have kavanah to be yotze, you can be yotze with his laning. But if he's not a bar chiyuva, if he himself doesn't have a chiyuv of Megillah, then he cannot be motzi you. So for who sheyishma mipi mishu chayiv b'kriyasa. Lefikach, since this is true, im haya hakoirei cheresh, if the one who's laning is a cheresh. Now, cheresh, usually when we're learning Gemara and we come across the word cheresh, we usually define it as a deaf mute. However, over here, obviously, we cannot be speaking about a mute. We're talking about somebody who's laning the Megillah. So this cheresh is a deaf person, and we're going to speak about him in greater detail in the Mishnah Berurah. So, if the Baal Kari is a cheresh, oy katan, or he's a minor, oy shoite, or he's somebody who is mentally deficient, so then, Hashemeya mimenu loy yotza. If you hear the Megillah from a cherish, a katan, a shoita, then you can't be yotza the mitzvah. Now, the simple understanding of the Mechaber, the Mechaber seems to be saying that a cherish, a katan, and a shoita, they don't have a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, and therefore they cannot be motzi you in Mikra Megillah. Because that's what the Mechaber just said at the beginning of Sif Beis. He said, in order for you to be yotze by listening to somebody else's kriya, that person has to have a chiyuv. But if that person does not have a chiyuv, he can't be motzi you. Therefore, lefikach, if you heard from a cherish, a katan, or a shaita, you can't be yotze. Why? Apparently the Mechaber is saying that they don't have a chiyuv. Now we're going to have to take a look at all of these cases. We're going to have to look at the cherish and see, why doesn't the cherish have a chiyuv? The katan, what kind of chiyuv does the katan have? What kind of chiyuv does he not have? The shaita, okay, shaita is a mentally deficient person. Hitaka does not have any chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. Continues the Mechaber in the top line of Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, V'yesh Omrim, there are those that say, this is brought down in the name of the Bahag, V'yesh Omrim, Shahanoshim, Einam Moitzios es Ha'anoshim. There are those shittas that say that a woman, although a woman, we said very clearly in Sif Aleph, a woman is chayiv in Mikra Megillah, yet, Yesh Omrim, we have this Bahag that says that a woman cannot be moitzi a man in Mikra Megillah. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Let's go back to Kuf Nun Gimel Lamed Aleph, and let's see the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Dalet. Yatza Yedei Chayvasai. Echad HaKoreh, whether you read the Megillah yourself, or Echad HaShemeah, or you hear the Megillah from somebody else, Yatza Yedei Chayvasai, you're Yotzi, you're Chiv because of Shemeah Ka'oina. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Dalet, V'tzarech sheyechaven HaKoreh lahoitzi. However, let's remember, the Baal Koreh who's reading the Megillah, he has to have kavanah to be motzi the listener, v'hashemeya lotzes, and the one who's hearing the Megillah from the Baal Koreh has to have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah by listening to the Baal Koreh. Kedin she'arei mitzvahs she'echad motzi chaverei. This is always the case. When one person is being motzi somebody else in a mitzvah or in a bracha, you need kavanah. The one who's being motzi has to have kavanah to be motzi. The one who's being yotze has to have kavanah to be yotze. Ukidulakaman b'simin tafresh tzadik sif yodalit. The Mishnah Berurah sends us a little bit further on, tafresh tzadik sif yodalit. Now, if you take a look at that Mishnah Berurah is located on Kuf Nun Hey Amid Beis. If you take a look at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Memches, the Chavetz Chaim makes a very important point over here. We just said that the Baal Koreh, the one who lanes the Megillah, has to have kavanah to be motzi the listeners. The listeners have to have kavanah to be yotze. Now, exactly what does that mean? When do you have to have this kavanah? So the Mishnah Berurah over here in Ois Katan Memches says, V'zeh hakivein, the intent of this is, hu kaidem shemaschel likroi, before the Baal Koreh begins to lane, yechavein al kol hakriya, he has to have in mind that when I do this laning, yechavein al kol hakriya zeh, he has to have in mind that when I lane this entire kriya, lotzes, he has to have I'm sorry, I read it wrong. There has to be a kavana at the beginning of the kriya. The listener has to have in mind to be yotze. And the Baal Koreh has to have in mind to be motzi. When? At the beginning of the kriya. The su ain't sarich lechavin b'chol hakriya. It's not that you have to have an ongoing kavanah. Don't think that when you sit to listen to the Megillah, you have to be pinching yourself every minute and saying, am I being mechavin to be yotze? Am I being mechavin to be yotze? And the Baal Koreh doesn't have to keep on thinking to himself, I'm having kavanah to be motzi the tzibur. The Baal Koreh has to have kavanah. He has to pay attention to his kriya. And the one who's listening has to pay attention to the words of the Megillah. So it's not that you have to have an ongoing, constant kavana. I want to be yotze. I want to be yotze. When you sit down to listen to the Megillah and you're listening, the Baal Koreh is making the brachas, you have to have in mind, I want to be yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, and he's being motzi me in the kriya. And then you sit down and you listen to the Megillah like a mensch. The Baal Koreh, when he gets up to lane, before he starts to lane, he has to set his mind, why am I laning? I'm being yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, and I'm being motzi the tzibur with the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. It's not something that you're supposed to become OCD about, that you have to sit and think about it constantly. Another point that I just like to make whenever we have a Mishnah Berurah like this, that talks about the necessity to have kavanah, to be yotze. Many times, let's say Shabbos when we make Kiddush. So a father comes to the table and he makes Kiddush, and he's motzi his family members that are sitting around the table. A lot of people are not paying attention. A lot of people, it's Kiddush, but do they have in mind, I want to be yotze? I want to be yotze with the Kiddush. Does the father have in mind, I'm being motzi my family in Kiddush? When you make the hamotzi on the Lechem Mishnah, and then you give out the Lechem Mishnah to the family to eat, does everybody around the table have in mind, I'm being yotze with the bracha of the father? I'm being yotze with my father's hamotzi lechem in the aretz. Sometimes, especially, the kids, I don't mean even ketanim, I mean even gedolim, the teenagers, they're sitting around the table. Are they really paying attention and thinking, I want to be yotze with my father's bracha of hamotzi lechem in haaretz? So it's kedai to remind the family sometimes of the necessity of kavana. Okay, now we go to Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Nehei. So, the Mechaber said, you could be Yotze your mitzvah of Mikra Megillah by listening to somebody else laying the Megillah. However, the important caveat is that the person who's being motzi you, he himself has to be a bar chiyuva. He has to be somebody who has the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. Then he could be motzi you. If he himself doesn't have a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, then he cannot be motzi you. And the Mechaber gave examples. The first example that Mechaber gave was he said a cherish. You cannot be yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. According to the Mechaber holds a cheresh, a deaf person, cannot be motzi you in the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. Now, the first, really, before we go into the Mishnah Berurah, I want to point out the Bir Halacha Dibra Maschil Cheresh. The Bir Halacha says over here, Miloshen HaShulchan Aruch, from the phraseology of the Mechaber in the Shulchan Aruch Mashma, it is very strongly implied de enoi bar chiyuva klal, that the cherish, the fellow who's deaf, is not a bar chiyuva. He has no chiyuv at all to hear the Megillah. Af likrois la'atzmai. He can't hear. I understand. He's deaf. He can't hear. But the implication of the Mechaber is that he doesn't even have a chiyuv to read the Megillah himself. Since he's deaf, he's completely potter from the mitzvah of Megillah, and that's why he can't be motzi you. Achein, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, misfarasai bebeis Yosef, if you read what the Mechaber says in the Beis Yosef, shekasav, where the Mechaber writes, the mishum parsume nisahu. Why is a deaf person? Why is there any kind of exemption for a deaf person when it comes to Mikra Megillah? So the Beis Yosef says we have to realize what's the ikr, what's the main point behind the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. It's parsume nisa. It's to publicize the nisim of Purim. Now, because Mikra Megillah is a mitzvah that the ikr of it is parsume nisa, inherent in the mitzvah is that the kriya has to be heard. In order to publicize something, you have to read it, and it has to be heard. Otherwise, it's not being publicized. Therefore, says the Mechaber in the Beis Yosef, a cheresh, somebody who's deaf, when he reads, right, he can't even hear what he's reading. So there's a lack of parsume nisa. That seems to be the problem with the cheresh. However, points out the Chavetz Chaim over here in the Bir Halacha, that only has to do with he can't be motzi somebody else. He has a flaw. His laning has a flaw. What's the laning? What's the flaw in his laning? When he lanes, he cannot even hear himself. Therefore, his laning does not create a parsume nisa for himself. It might be able to create a parsume nisa for other people, but it cannot create a parsume nisa for himself. He can't hear himself. That's a flaw in Mikra Megillah because it's a lack of parsume nisa. But the Chavetz Chaim says that would seem to be rakla inyan l'hoitzi acherim. That flaw would seem to be something which would prevent him from being motzi other people. Shehem pikchen, they are regular, so to speak, normal people. By normal, I mean they're just not deficient in this way. And they, tzrichen l'shmaya me'isha shemeya b'ozdov dafka. So for them, it would be better that they should hear from somebody who can hear his own kriya. Skip a little bit, and the Bir Halacha says over in the brackets, and there's another very strong reason to suggest that a cheresh should be chayiv in Mikra Megillah. And you know what that is? We learned yesterday that noshim are chayiv in Mikra Megillah. And we had a very basic question. The mitzvah of Mikra Megillah is a mitzvah seishas man grama. And women are always pater in a mitzvah seishas man grama. It's a mitzvah that's time dependent. Women are usually exempt from mitzvahs that are time dependent. So why are noshim chayiv? And we said the reason why noshim are chayiv is because afhein hoisa b'hoisa nes. They were saved by the nes of Purim, and therefore they also carry the responsibility and the mitzvahs of Mikra Megillah to be mefarsim the nes. Nu, a cherish was also b'hoisa nes. Certainly the gzeira of Achashverosh and Haman applied to the deaf people as well. So the same way a woman is normally exempt, but she's chayiv because af hein hoisa boisa anes, so to a cherish who sometimes is exempt in certain mitzvahs, he should be chayiv because af hein hoisa boisa anes. So the Chavetz Chaim really struggles over here. In the brackets, he says, "V'haloi af ba'alma shenoshim p'turis mitzvah seishas man grama." Noshim are usually part of a mitzvah seishas man grama. Hacha chivu oisan by Mikra Megillah the chayiv mipnei she'af hein hoya boisa anes. So the deaf people were also saved on Purim. They certainly should have the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. The Chavetz Chaim says there's much to speak about in this topic. This is not a place to be marich. However, the Chavetz Chaim says Ledina halacha l'maisa ein nafkamina. There's no nafkamina. Why? The balav hachi. Without this whole discussion. Haloi das kama rishonim. Many rishonim. Harashba, v'hariyaz, v'harashbatz, shagam la'acherim hu motzi. Many rishonim disagree with this mechaber completely. Many rishonim hold that not only does a cherish have his own chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, he even could be motzi acherim. V'choshkein hu ba'atzmai bar chiyuva. And therefore, the Biur Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim, closes out and he says, "Va'al kain cherish la'atzmai bevadai mechuyev likrais ba'atzmai kevan she'ena shemeya." He certainly has to lane on his own. Va'afi mikre'enu b'loi ta'amim, even if he lanes without the trop because he can't hear what he's laning. Gam kain en peda, it doesn't matter. But certainly, the Chavetz Chaim says, halacha l'maisa. While the very strong implication from the Mechaber is that a cherish has no chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, the Biur Halacha says this is not a davar muskim. Many Rishonim disagree with the Mechaber. They hold a cherish does have a chiyuv, and therefore a cherish should certainly lane for himself. Nevertheless, what did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said a cherish cannot be motzi acherim. So now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah is cut in hay. Says the Mechaber. Obviously, we're talking here about a cherish that can speak, because we're talking about a cherish who wants to lane. So the Mechaber says, Hainu hamedaber. When we mention a cherish here, we're speaking about a cherish who can speak. Elsewhere in Shas and Halacha, cherish often means a deaf mute, but over here, obviously, we're talking about a cherish Hainu hamedaber. He can speak. Ve'enoi shemeya klal, but he cannot hear at all. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, this is very interesting. Because in other places in halacha we paskin when there's a chiyuv to recite something, and we're going to see he's going to pick on, let's say, Kriya Shema and Birkas Hamazon. Kriya Shema, you have a chiyuv daraisa twice a day to say Kriya Shema. So normally we paskin if you say Kriya Shema and you do not say it loud enough so that you yourself can hear it. So you were kairei, you said Kriya Shema, but ein hashmiya laznai. You didn't say it loud enough that you could hear it. Yotza b'di'eved, we paskin that you're yotza. Lechatchila, you're supposed to say Kriya Shema loud enough so that you could hear what you're saying. But b'di'eved, even if you didn't hear it, you're yotza. Yet here by Megillah, we're saying since this person is deaf, right? If he could say the Megillah but he can't hear it, not yotza. So why? Why are we being so tough over here by Megillah, where by Kriya Shema we say not that way? And we say the same thing in Hilchos Megillah. When you bench, this is a very important halacha. Lechatchila, when you bench, you're supposed to bench loud enough so that you can hear what you're saying. But b'di'eved, if you bench and you can't hear it, you're yotza. Yet again, here by the cherish, we're saying, since he's medaber ve'enoi shemeya, since he can speak but he can't hear, there's a flaw in his Mikra Megillah. Why? Why is it so important to be able to hear? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Hacha le'inyan Megillah, over here by Megillah, do mishum presume nisa. The ikar of Megillah is to publicize the nes. Hechmiru ba yaiser, we're more machmer, da hashmiya la'aznai hu le'ikuva. Over here, at least according to the Mechaber, the need to be able to hear what you say is li'ikuva. It will prevent you from being yotze the mitzvah if you can't hear, because it's inherent in the requirement of Presumei Nisa is that you have to say it loud, at least loud enough that you yourself can hear it. If you can't hear, that's a flaw in the laning. It's a lack of Presumei Nisa. Inami, or another reason why Mikra Megillah might be different, suggests the Chavetz Chaim, the Cherish Garatvei, it could be that a Cherish who cannot hear, who's physically unable to hear, is worse, Sheina Yochel La'ashmi'a La'aznoi, because he cannot hear. He's physically incapable of hearing. And if you take a look in the Dirshu, footnote number 12, which is back in the back of the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah on page 127, the Kosav Ataz, the Taz explains, Shehu al derech masha amru Chazal, this is based on the concept of Chazal, kol aroi lebila, anything that can be mixed, ein bila ma'akeves by, the mixing is not a requirement. It does not prevent you from being yoitza. If something cannot be mixed, then the mixing is ma'akiv. What is that Gemara in Menachos referring to? We're referring to a carbon mincha. When you bring a carbon mincha, you have a combination of flour, oil, and really it's supposed to be mixed very well. Yet, b'di'evet, if you did not mix it well, you're yoitza anyway, as long as it was a mixture that can be mixed. So kol royal lebila, as long as the carbon mincha was able to be mixed, ein bila ma'akeves by. The fact that you did not mix it is not ma'akev. That won't prevent you from being yaitza what you need to be yaitza. But if ein a royal lebila, if it's a mixture that cannot be mixed, then the lack of mixing is ma'akev. So too over here. A normal person, a person who can hear, so even if he said it quietly, b'di'evet he's yaitza. But if he cannot hear, if he's physically incapable of hearing, that suggests the Chavetz Chaim is worse. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'ayin b'shari tshuva, he sends us to the shari tshuva. Dedavke im cherish gamor she'ena shomeh klal. We're speaking over here about somebody who's deaf, meaning he cannot hear at all. La'afuke, this stands in contrast to imhu shemeya, if he's hard of hearing, he can hear. Kishemedabram loy b'kal ram, he could hear if somebody speaks to him very loud. That's not the cherish that we're talking about here. Here we're speaking about a cherish who cannot hear at all. V'chol zehu l'das ha'shulchan aruch, but the Chavetz Chaim points out that this whole discussion is only according to the Shita of the Shulchan Aruch, who holds that the cherish somehow cannot be motzi other people, and perhaps might not even have a chiyuv himself to hear the Megillah, to lein the Megillah. Aval das kama achreinim, however, it's the opinion of many other achreinim, da afilu hu cherish gamor, even if somebody is totally deaf and he cannot hear at all, yotza hashemea mimenu, the one who hears him lein Megillah is yotzei. Nevertheless, everybody would agree, certainly lechatchila, you should not appoint somebody who's deaf to be the Balkaira. Vedan, you should know, Demisha kavdu aznav, somebody who is hard of hearing, Aishu rachait min habima, or his seat in shul is far away from the bima where the Balkaira will be laning, Ve'ena yachal lishmaya hetev, and therefore he will not be able to listen well, min hakare, to hear well from the Balkaira. Yizaher, he should take care, likrois la'atzmai, to lane for himself, mimegillah kashera, from a kosher Megillah. If you come to shul and you sit all the way in the back and the Balkaira is laning quietly and you're not going to be able to hear the Balkaira, says the Chavetz Chaim, make sure that you yourself are holding a kosher Megillah and lane from yourself from the kosher Megillah so that you should be yaitza the mitzvah. Or alternatively, says the Chavetz Chaim, al kol panim, at least yechois chumash. If you don't have a kosher Megillah, at least have a printed chumash. Va'atevois sheyechsar loi, and the words that you miss from the Balkaira, yomer tekef min hachumash, recite them right away from the chumash. This is based on a halacha that we're going to see later, that b'di'evet, there are shittas that hold that you only need to hear the majority of the Megillah, or read the majority of the Megillah from a kosher Megillah. If you heard the majority from a kosher Megillah, or you laned the majority from a kosher Megillah, and the rest you heard or laned from a printed sefer, you could be yoitza. So says the Chavetz Chaim, you can't hear well, you don't have a kosher Megillah, no, at least read the words that you're missing from a printed chumash. Okay, The second example that the Mechaber brought of somebody that you cannot be yoitza the mitzvah of Megillah from is a katan, a minor. Now, remember, in Sif Aleph we said that there is a chiyuv of chinuch on a katan. If you have a young child, boy or a girl, because like we said, the girls, afein haisa ba'isa, so an adult woman is chayiv in mikra Megillah. Therefore, we learned yesterday there's a chiyuv of chinuch on a young girl. You have to be mechanechar in the mitzvah of mikra Megillah. But a katan cannot lane for you. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to point out something very interesting about this. Let's realize the whole chiyuv of mikra Megillah is only a d'Rabbanan. The chiyuv of a katan also seemingly is a d'Rabbanan. So why can't a katan be motzi you? Your chiyuv to hear the Megillah is a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. His chiyuv to lane the Megillah or hear the Megillah is also d'Rabbanan. So it seems to be a level playing field. Why can't he be motzi me? So let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Oy katan. Afagav the katan nami chayav al kol panim d'Rabbanan. Even though the katan himself has a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, k'dela el b'sif aleph, like we learned at Sif Aleph, afilu hachi, still in all, eina yachal lahitzi es hagadol, he cannot be motzi a gadol. Why not? Delagabe katan explains the Chavetz Chaim, with the katan have a trade d'Rabbanan. The katan, the minor, his chiyuv is only, it takes 2 d'Rabbanans to make him a chayiv. There's 1 d'Rabbanan of the whole mitzvah of mikra Megillah. The whole mitzvah of mikra Megillah is only a d'Rabbanan. Then there's a second d'Rabbanan, and that is a katan is usually not chayiv in mitzvahs. Why is a katan chayiv in mitzvahs? Only midrabbanan, a chiyuv of chinuch. So now the katan is only chayiv in mikra Megillah due to 2 d'Rabbanans. The d'Rabbanan of the mitzvah itself, of mikra Megillah, and the d'Rabbanan of chinuch. Rotza loymar, we're on Kuftan Gimel Amud Beis now. Rotza loymar, the etzem kriyas Megillah varak b'divrei seifrim. The whole chiyuv of mikra Megillah is only a d'Rabbanan. The chiyuv shel katan, and then the chiyuv of a katan have a gamkein rak b'd'Rabbanan b'chol mitzvahs. And a katan is only chayiv b'd'Rabbanan in any mitzvahs. So it takes 2 d'Rabbanans to give the katan the chiyuv. Mashe ein ke gadol, but the gadol have a chad d'Rabbanan. He's a gadol. He's chayiv in mitzvahs. And now there's a chiyuv d'Rabbanan of mikra Megillah. So it only takes 1 d'Rabbanan to make the adult chayiv, but it takes 2 d'Rabbanans to make the child chayiv. Therefore, it's not a level playing field. He can't be motzi me because we don't have the same level of chiyuv. His chiyuv is based on 2 d'Rabbanans. My chiyuv is only based on 1 d'Rabbanan. Now, v'loy asi trei d'Rabbanan, the Chavetz Chaim says the katan who's based on 2 d'Rabbanans cannot come umapik chad d'Rabbanan and be motzi an adult who's based on 1 d'Rabbanan. Now there's a very interesting Sharet Zion over here. Sharet Zion is katan Yod Aleph. He says this seems to be odd. You know why? Because take a look at Hilchos Megillah. Benching is the only bracha that we have that is a daraisa. But when is benching a daraisa? The pasuk says, "Va'achalta," and you eat, "V'savata," and you will be satisfied, "Uveirachta," and then you will make a bracha. You'll say Birkas Hamazon. Gemara says, when is the rechi of daraisa? Only if you eat kedei sevia. Only if you eat enough to satisfy yourself. V'achalta v'savata. That's when you have a chi of daraisa of benching. But if you don't eat kedei sevia, you eat a kazayas, you didn't eat a kedei sevia, then you only have a chi of d'Rabbanan. That's one of the ways that the Rabbinic Shalom praises Klal Yisrael. The Rabbinic Shalom says, the Gemara tells us, how could I be angry with Klal Yisrael? I gave them a chiyuv, v'achalta v'savata uverachta, and they go ahead and they're machmir, and they bench, they make a bracha to me, even if they eat less than kedei sevia. Nevertheless, what do we see by benching? We see that benching could be a daraisa, or it could be a d'Rabbanan. So now, let's say we have an adult and a child who sit down to eat together. And they both wash, and they both make a hamotzi, but they both eat less than kedei sevia. The Mechaber seems to imply, back in Hilchos Megillah, that since the adult in this case only has a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, because he didn't eat kedei sevia, now the katan could be yotzi, the gadol. even though normally, says the Mechaber, the cotton can't be motzi the gadol, because the gadol is a chiyuv daraisa of benching, and the cotton's chiyuv of benching is always only a derabanan. But now, since the adult only has a chiyuv derabanan, because he didn't eat kedei svia, now the cotton could be motzi. And the implication over there, says the Magen Avram, is that this is true even if the cotton also ate less than kedei svia. Now, in that case, we have the same situation that we have here. We have an adult who has a chiyuv derabanan to bench, and we have a child who has a chiyuv to bench, but that chiyuv is only based on a double derabanan. His whole chiyuv to bench is only a derabanan because he ate less than kedei svia, and it's only a derabanan because he's a cotton. And yet the Mechaber seems to say that the cotton could be motzi the gadol. So why is that any different than here? Over here we just said that you can't have a loyasi trade derabanan umapik chad derabanan. So how come it works over there? So there are two possible answers. One answer is there are those that want to say that no, indeed the Mechaber over there must be talking about a case where the cotton ate kedei svia. If the cotton ate kedei svia, so the chiyuv to bench is a daraisa, and he has a chiyuv to bench only because of a derabanan, because he's a cotton, but it's only based on one derabanan. That's what some achronim want to say. Others want to suggest a different answer, and that's what's brought down over here in the Sharetzion and Ois Yud Aleph. Actually, he doesn't say he does. He says, Dahasam, by Birkas HaMazon, Yochel HaKatan Lechel Kedei Savai Lahavi Atzmai Yedei Chiyuv Derabanan. What the difference is that by benching, the katan has the ability to elevate his chiyuv to a chiyuv based on a single derabanan. All he has to do is eat more. If he eats kedei svia, so then he would be on a level playing field with the adult. So it is biyadai of the katan to elevate his chiyuv so that he should be on the same level as the adult. That's enough to allow him to be motzi the adult, even when he did not eat kedei svia. It's a little bit like what we said before. Since the katan has the ability by Birkas Hamazon to elevate his chiyuv to one that's based on only a single derabanan, he could be motzi the adult even when he ate less than kedei svia, and his chiyuv is based on a double derabanan, while the adult's chiyuv is based on a single derabanan. But here by Mikra Megillah, it's not that way. Here by Mikra Megillah, the child's chiyuv is always going to be based on a double derabanan. There's no way for the child to make himself chayiv only based on a single derabanan. The fact is that Mikra Megillah is always only a chiyuv derabanan, and the fact is that he's a cotton who always only has a chiyuv derabanan. That's two derabanans. And therefore the two derabanan can't come to be motzi the single derabanan. Okay. Now let's go weiter in this Mishnah Berurah. So we're 4 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah here on Kuftan Gimel Amid Beis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hinei le'el b'sibit tafresh ayin hey sif gimel. Earlier, when we learned Hilchos Chanukah, we learned that Sibit Tafresh Ayin Hey. Hevi HaMechaber, the Mechaber brings a shita. The Yesh Mi Shemachshir B'Katan She'Yigia L'Chinuch. There is a shita that says that a katan that is already of the age of chinuch, She'Yachal L'Hoitzi Acherim B'Hatla Kasai. He could be motzi an adult in Hadlakas Deres Chanukah. Okay. V'hu adin L'Inyan Kriyas HaMegillah. No, says the Chavetz Chaim again. It would seem to be the same thing. Hadlakas Chanukah is a derabanan. A cotton that's higia l'chinuch. So Chanukah, Hadlakas Deres Chanukah is a derabanan, and his chiyuv of chinuch is a derabanan. 2 derabanans. And yet the Mechaber did bring down a shita that said that the cotton who's only based on 2 derabanans could be motzi the adult who is based on 1 derabanan. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, that according to that shita that the Mechaber brings in Tafresh Ayin Hey, then the halacha would be the same here by Mikra Megillah. That shita who holds that the cotton that's a gil chinuch could be motzi an adult in Neres Chanukah would also agree and would also hold that a cotton can be motzi an adult in Mikra Megillah. V'ayin be'ikrei dinim, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Sefer Ikrei Dinim, shekasa b'shem sama dechaye, the mamakam atchak, that indeed, under pressing circumstances, kishe'ein sham anoshim b'kiyim b'mikra Megillah, if you do not have an adult that's capable of laning the Megillah, yachal ha'itziam katan she'egiya l'chinuch, based on that shita that the Mechaber brings down in Taf Reish Ayin Hey, in a shasat chak, we would say that a cotton could be motzi an adult in Mikra Megillah, the same way a cotton can be motzi an adult in Neres Chanukah. If you take a look in Sharet Tzion, Ois Cotton Yud Beis, the Chavetz Chaim brings down that there are those who want to say that you can't compare Chanukah to Mikra Megillah, because if the Mechaber brought down that shita in Hilchos Chanukah and he didn't bring down that shita in Hilchos Megillah, there's a reason. Now, what the chiluk is between Megillah and Chanukah is beyond the scope of what we're doing here in this shir. Okay. Now we go on to Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Zayin. So the Mechaber said on the top line here on Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Beis that Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say that Noshim Einam Motzi Ois Ha'anoshim, that a woman cannot be Motzi a man in Mikra Megillah. Now let's remember, in Sif Aleph we said that women are chayiv in Mikra Megillah, because Afein Haisa Ba'Oisei Anes. So women are chayiv in Mikra Megillah. The rule of thumb that the Mechaber gives us is, if you hear Megillah from somebody who himself is a bar chiyuva, then that person could be motzi you. So it should follow that if a woman is a bar chiyuva, if a woman is chayiv in Mikra Megillah, she should be able to be motzi a man. Yet, we have the Mechaber brings down from the Bahag this Yesh Oimrim that a woman cannot be motzi a man. So we have to see why that should be true. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ois Cotton Zayin, V'yesh Oimrim sha'anoshim einam motzios, v'loi dami l'ner Chanukah. The first thing the Chavetz Chaim points out is, wait a second, let's go back again to Neres Chanukah. We know for sure that a woman could be motzi a man when it comes to Neres Chanukah, because we learned in Siman, again, Taf Reish Ayin Hey Sif Gimel, it says Beferish in Taf Reish Ayin Hey Sif Gimel, that women are chayiv in Neres Chanukah, and we learned over there that she could light and she could be motzi all of Bnei Besa, her whole family. She could be motzi her husband. If her husband is not home, and the woman is home and she's lighting Neres Chanukah at home, she's motzi her husband. So what's the difference? Why is it over here that a woman cannot be motzi a man in Mikra Megillah, but she could be motzi a man in Neres Chanukah? And again, even more basic, if the woman is chayiv in Mikra Megillah, so why can't she be motzi a man in Mikra Megillah? So says the Chavetz Chaim, the Shani Megillah is different. The heavy kamay Kriyas HaTorah, because Mikra Megillah is similar to Kriyas HaTorah. It's a laning that you do in shul to be motzi a tzibur. Upesula mipnei kavod hatzibur. Her psul is kavod hatzibur. It's not kavod hatzibur for a woman to get up and to be motzi the rabbim. And this is a beferish mechaber in Siman Reish Pei Beis in Hilchos Shabbos. The mechaber says, really, a woman, technically speaking, a woman should be able to be motzi the tzibur in Kriyas HaTorah. Aval Amru Chachamim, however, the Chazal has stated, Isha loy tikra, a woman should not lane b'tzibur mipnei kavod hatzibur. So it's a beferish mechaber. It's bringing down a Chazal. Aval Amru Chachamim, Isha loy tikra b'tzibur mipnei kavod hatzibur. And therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim over here, the same way a woman does not lane, regular laning from the Torah Kedosha because of kavod hatzibur, she doesn't lane the Megillah because of kavod hatzibur. V'lochein, and therefore continues the Mishnah Berurah, afilu liyachid eina motzia. Even if she's not doing it in shul, even in your own living room, somebody wants his wife to be motzi him in Mikra Megillah? No, mishum loy plug. It's a loy plug. A woman does not lane. Why? Kavod hatzibur. V'gam, and furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, the efsher, there's also a possibility, which is fascinating. We're going to see this in the Ramah shortly. V'gam, the efsher, the isha ena chayavis b'kriya, it could be that a woman does not have a chiyuv to lane the Megillah, rak lishmoya, only to hear the Megillah. Ukidalakame, like we're going to see shortly in the words of the Ramah. Very interesting. A man has a chiyuv. What's the bracha that we make on Megillah? Al mikra Megillah, on the reading of the Megillah. Now, each and every person does not have a chiyuv to actually lein, but why is that? That's because we said at the outset of the shir, shemeya ke'oina. When you hear from somebody else, Chazal have stated, shemeya ke'oina. Listening is like reciting. It's like saying it. But a man, in essence, has a chiyuv of mikra Megillah. That's what the chiyuv is called. It's not called shmias Megillah, it's called mikra Megillah. This is a little bit different, let's say, than shofar. Shofar, there is no chiyuv to blow shofar. There's a chiyuv to hear shofar. In order to hear the shofar, somebody has to blow it. But there is no chiyuv of blowing. There's a chiyuv of hearing shofar. Megillah, there's a chiyuv of mikra Megillah. However, the Ramah is going to suggest that that's by a man, not by a woman. A woman's chiyuv is a different chiyuv. A woman's chiyuv is only shmiya, is only to hear the Megillah. So therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, V'gam de'efsher de'isha ena chayeves b'kriya. It could be that a woman has no chiyuv of kriya, rak l'shmoya, only to hear, ukid'l'kameh, like we're going to see shortly in the Ramah, umikre, and therefore she's considered she'ena mechuyeves b'davar l'gabe ish. In contrast to a man, again, it's not a level playing field. We don't have the same chiyuv. If we don't have the same chiyuv, you can't be motzi me. Also, others want to suggest, if she doesn't have the chiyuv of mikra, then her kriya is lacking. She's not a bar chiyuva in the kriya, so that her kriya is lacking. Aval isha motzia es chaverta. However, two women, that is a level playing field. So one woman could be motzi another woman. However, just a caveat to that, the Sharetzian says in Ois Katan Tezvav, Aval l'noshim rabbis eina isha motzian. A woman should not get together with 25 women and make a kriya to be motzi. Women, that, he says, zila b'hu milsa, that's a quote from a Taisvis in Sukkah on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, that is not proper. It's not decorous. Zila b'hu milsa. Zila b'hu milsa literally means it's disgraceful. It's not disgraceful, maybe too strong a word. It's zila. It's not bakovedik. It's not a bakovedik a thing. If it's a laning for a tzibur, it should not be a woman. Again, it's a kavanat tzibur issue. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah, top line of Kuftun Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Ramah, Hago. V'yesha, remember, there are those that say, Im ha'isha kaira la'atzma, if a woman is laning for herself, mivareches, Lishmaya Megillah, the bracha she should make is Lishmaya Megillah, not on Mikra Megillah. Sheina Chayeves B'Kriya. This is the shita that we were just mentioning, that her Chayev is on Shmiya, not on Kriya. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ches, Im Isha Kaira, if a woman lanes for herself, V'ayin B'Magen Avram, he sends us to the Magen Avram, Shemitzadeh, who takes the position, Deloy Tikra La'atzma Klal, that a woman should really not lane for herself at all. Rak Tishma Meha Anoshim, she should take care to hear Megillah from a man. V'chol Zebi Yesh La B'Mil Shmaya. Obviously, that's only the case if she has somebody that she could hear from. If she does not have a man who could lane for her, she should certainly lane for herself in a kosher Megillah, and she should make the following bracha: Asher kedishanu b'mitzvaysav itzivanu lishmaya mikra Megillah. Now let's go to Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber. Androgynous. An androgynous is somebody who has the physical features of both a man and a woman. Motzi minoi, that person, the androgynous, could lane, and he could be motzi another androgynous. V'loi she'enoi minoi, but he cannot be motzi a regular person who is distinctly either male or female. Says the Mishnah Berurah, androgynous. Yesh lo zachrus v'nakvus. He has the genitalia of both a man and a woman. So he has the physical features of a man and a woman. He could be mitzi another androgynous. Why? Because an androgynous is an androgynous is an androgynous. We just have a suffix. Are they considered a zachar? Is an androgynous considered a male or a female? But, says the Mishnah Berurah, Mimanoshach, the im zezachar, if this androgynous who's laning is considered a male, gam zezachar, so then the androgynous that he's being motzi is also a male. V'im zoy nekeva, and if the androgynous who's laning is considered a female, gam zu nekeva, then the one who is being motzi is also considered a female. So it's a level playing field, and they can be motzi each other. V'im nizbar dehu beria b'fnei atzmai, there's another sheet in the Gemara that holds that an androgynous is not male or female, it's a different kind of creature. Gam hasheni beria b'fnei atzmaihu. Whatever it is, miman of shach, if you have one or more, if you have two androgynusin, they are all a level playing field. But but the androgynous cannot be motzi somebody who's not an androgynous. Why? The shem is then a keva v'asheni who's achar. Maybe one of them is a female and one of them is a male. And even if you'll go like the shita, that a woman could be motzi a man. So maybe the one who's laning, let's say a woman is laning and she's trying to be motzi an androgynous. Well, if the androgynous is a male, so if the androgynous is a female, so no problem. A female could be motzi a female. If the androgynous is a male, there's a shita that says that a woman could be motzi a male. So why can't a woman lane for an androgynous? Still, zer gara tvei, this is actually worse. The be'inon sha'motzi es acherim nicker imhu isha, because the one who's being motzi somebody else, we have to know what he is. Can't be a suffix. Let's go weiter here in the Mechaber in Siv Gimel. Tumtum. A tumtum is somebody who we don't know if he's a male or a female because that area of the body somehow is covered over. And we cannot ascertain. He is either a male or a female. Just we cannot tell. A tumtum. Or somebody who is halfway an Eved Kanani. How is somebody halfway an Eved Kanani? Well, you have an Eved Kanani that was owned by two partners, and one partner freed him. So now he's half an Eved and half a Ben Chayrin. These two people, the Tumtum and the Chetziyai Eved, they cannot even be motzi somebody else who is like them. Ice cotton Yud Beis in the Mishnah Berurah, Tumtum afilu minai ena motzi. Why? The Shem is zachar v'zenekeva, right? Because we don't know. The tumtum again is either a male or a female. We just don't know which one. So this tumtum might be a male, this tumtum might be a female, or vice versa. An androgynous is different because every androgynous is the same. Right? An androgynous is an androgynous is an androgynous. Either every androgynous is a male, or every androgynous is a female, or every androgynous is a beria b'fnei atzmai. A tumtum, each tumtum, we don't know what he or she is. And that's why a tumtum can't be motzi even another tumtum. V'chein misha chetziyai eved, a chetziyai eved chetziyai ben chayrin, loy asi tzad avdus tidei, the half of him that's an eved, mapik la'acher cannot come and be motzi somebody else, sheyesh by tzad cheres. So if you have two people, each one is a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chayrin, they can't even be motzi each other. Because Ruvain, who's a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chayrin, half of him is an eved. The half of him that's an Eved cannot be motzi Shimon, who's a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chayrin, because half of Shimon is a Ben Chayrin. So the half Eved of Ruvain cannot be motzi the half Ben Chayrin of Shimon. Says the Ramah, we'll just finish this sif. Says the Ramah Haga, there are those that say, Ta'afilu es atzmai einoi motzi. This is going on the one who's a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chayrin. There are those that say that somebody who's a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chayrin, he can't even be motzi himself. He can't lane for himself. V'tzarach l'shmara me'acherim, he has to hear from somebody else. Why? Because he himself is a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chayrin. His Chatzi Eved cannot be motzi his Chatzi Ben Chayrin. Says Mishnah Berurah Yud Gimel, Yesharman Dafilos Atzmai, Zeloi Kaya Tumtum. This is not going back on the case of the Tumtum. A Tumtum certainly could be motzi himself. Whatever he is, he is. Raka Chetziyai Eved v'Chetziyai Ben Chayrin. This is going back on the halacha of the Chetziyai Eved, Chetziyai Ben Chayrin. He can't be motzi himself, suggests the Ramah. Umishum de loyasi tzadavdos tidei, because his own, the part of himself that's an Eved, cannot come umapik tzad cheres tidei and be motzi the part of himself that is a ben chayrin. However, this only is true according to the shita that we learned in the Ramah that says that a woman can't be motzi a man. The eved daima leisha. Let's remember, an eved and a woman, that's a level playing field. An eved and a woman have the same level of chiyuv hamitzvahs. So if you hold, like the Yeshayimrim on the top line of Kufnun Gimel Lamed Beis, that a woman can't be motzi a man, that's when you have this problem of a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chayrin. If you hold that a woman could be motzi a man, then there's no problem with a chatzi eved, chatzi ben chayrin. The part of the person that's an eved is like a woman, and a woman could be motzi a man. So then there's no problem. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll continue next time, Yirtzeh Hashem, with Sif Daled. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should send Yeshua for us, Parnas and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'Yeskal Tzedek B'Meherav Yamenu. Amen. Just for those newcomers to the shir, this shir was a little bit longer than usual. I'm usually very careful to cut at the 45-minute mark. I went a few minutes overtime this time. Please bear with me. Thank you and be well.